Are we recording? Are we ready?
Absolutely.
We're on the air. All right.
Good sound.
So, my godson has asked me to give some information that I know that other people may not know. And since I'm now 81 years old, there's not much more time for me to be telling people things. And so for my children, my grandchildren, my nieces and nephews and their children, there's special focus on my mother. But I am the product of 4 grandparents who each have very interesting stories, and then the product of 2 parents. My father said of my mother that she was the pick of the litter. That is, she had an older brother, Romeo, and an older sister, Eva. Romeo had a large number of children, and Eva had none. And then her brother, Edward, who was the smartest of the people in the family outside of my mother. And then Rocco, Uncle Jeannie, we called him. And then my Aunt Beatrice, my mother's sister, and they were very close. And my mother, and then she had a little brother named Leonard. So there was a large family, and she was young. When her father died, she hardly remembered him. He was a very special man. He was a stone carver. The parents of my mother's mother were living near Hershey, Pennsylvania, in a place called Waltonville. And they heard that there was a stone carver who was working on the cathedral in Annapolis. He was carving gargoyles way up high, little ugly faces on stone, at the Annapolis Cathedral. And they went and solicited him, sought him out, and he married my grandmother. He died young from tuberculosis, which he got from inhaling marble dust from carving statues in stone. And my grandmother moved with her family to Philadelphia. And my mother's just older sister, Aunt Beatrice, married my Uncle Bob, Bob Sebastian, and my father was a friend of Uncle Bob's, and that is how my father and my mother met. My father was a very interesting man, a rotten, spoiled firstborn child. His father was more interesting. His father lived in Italy. He was born in a place called San Donato Val da Camino, which is St. Dominic, the Valley of Camino, which is very close to Monte Cassino. Monte Cassino being the seat of the Dominican order, I believe, which was bombed in the Second World War to oblivion, and American money rebuilt it. But in 1897, when my grandfather was 13 years old, his parents put him on a boat for America. He didn't know anybody on the boat. When they got to New York City, there was a distant relative who greeted him and fed him for a while. He somehow got to Philadelphia, and because he has a child, a young boy, he had some proficiency in using a hammer to cut up stones. He sought out work in Philadelphia, making cobblestone streets. And then in a relatively short time, he hired other people to help him, took contracts with the city, and by the time he was 20 years old, in 7 years, he was a millionaire. That's what America was like in that day, no taxes. And he was a very interesting person who had a tremendous personality and made friends with people very easily. And he, with his own money, built a Dante School, which is still on the maps in Philadelphia, in the Chester area, which was an orphanage. And I slept in that orphanage once as a child, nuns around the orphanage. Because of that generosity, the King of Italy knighted him Chevalier of the Italian country. And the year I was born, my father and his father went to Italy to visit Mussolini. Mussolini was trying to favor people who were Italian Americans in America in order to give him support from the American government. My father was a person who was a good tenor voice, sang very well, and in his early 20s, he performed in vaudeville with Morton Downey. And then his father said, I need you home here to take care of the business. And so he came home and took over the business. My mother was uneducated in the sense that she never got formal schooling. But she read a great deal, and she was extremely intelligent, and she accomplished a great deal. She would do the Sunday New York Times cross puzzle in ink, crossword puzzle in ink, and people would call her to ask her questions about what the answers were. So she had a pretty good command of the language. And in her later years, she was on the board of directors of the hospital in Philadelphia on Broad Street, Methodist Hospital, where I was born. That's all I know to say at this time. As I was saying, I was firstborn. In fact, I was the firstborn of firstborns for 8 generations. Unfortunately, we were all peasants, and so it was not actually royalty. But being firstborn, I got the undivided attention of a dedicated woman who provided me with the foundation, which has tremendously positively affected my life. She spent a great deal of time training me and teaching me to sing songs, do many other things. And my father actually complained to me later in life that he was very upset that he had her all to himself till I was born, and then he hardly had her at all because she was spending all her time with me. Which is a strange thing for your father to say to you.
He said that seriously?
Oh, yeah.
He said it was serious?
Oh, yeah. Complained to me about that. He was, not only was he a tenor, but he was a civil engineer trained at Drexel Institute. And he was a poet, and I have a book of poetry that I actually had bound and distributed to people, and you probably can see it from somebody because there's copies around. My mother, I realize now, caused me a problem that I only recognized in very later years of my life. Obviously, they told me a story that when I was 3 years old, I went with them to the boardwalk in Atlantic City, and I sang God Bless America, and a crowd gathered around me, and some man said, "Hey, he can't be a child, he's got to be a midget. No child can sing like that." Now, how would I know that? I don't remember from being 3 years old because I was told that. And I'm sure that through my early years, my parents would say, "Show these people how smart you are." And of course, I was so happy to do that. And then for many, many 30, 40, 50 years after that, I was always trying to show people how smart I was. And people hate that. I mean, I was smarter than them for the most part, and the last thing they wanted me to do is rub their nose in it. And I didn't know I was doing that, something I was trained in by youth. And it hurt me. I was so highly loved that the first time that I got into a squabble with a little boy in the park near my house, he hit me. And I didn't cry, and I didn't hit him back. I was just so surprised by that I famously said, and it's been quoted to me for years, "Mama, everybody's not loving me." So, you know, here was a child that only knew love for a very long time. You know, it's very important to have someone who nurtures you. You're very blessed to be a firstborn child and have a dedicated woman take care of you. My firstborn son is in that category. My father was very much upset by the idea of Christmas presents because he noted that the people would charge extra money at Christmas time, and then after Christmas was over, they would have these big sales, and had you waited till after Christmas, you could have bought the same stuff for around half the price. So he decided one year we were going to have no presents for Christmas, and he was going to give us the money that we were going to have for Christmas, and that after Christmas we were going to buy presents, so we had a lot more presents that way because it gave us the same amount of money. My mother, on the other hand, adored Christmas and couldn't conceive of the idea they would have no Christmas presents. So my father gave us money, and my mother secretly bought presents and gave us presents. So we had both presents and the money to buy things afterwards, and my father never mentioned it again.
Was there a favorite holiday, like Thanksgiving, Christmas, or a favorite time, a routine that you'd look forward to?
Okay. I went to a very private grammar school. There were 6 children in the class. It was taught by nuns, called Notre Dame Academy. It was on Rittenhouse Square, a very select place. Ethel Barrymore actually went to school there. And it was a private school which was over, school year was over like in the very early part of June. And so in June, my sister and I and my mother were packed off to go down to Wildwood Crest, where we would spend like 13, 14 weeks until it was time to go back to school. So I spent a lot of my early years, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, spending the summer in Wildwood Crest, Fern Avenue actually. And we would be with my mother all the time, and if it would rain, she would take us out to the store and we'd buy coloring books and crayons and color. And then every day around 5 o'clock, we would go down to the railroad station, which was outdoor, and wait for the train to come in, which was a steam engine train. Came in from Philadelphia, and that was the terminus in Wildwood Crest, and they would turn around and puff up steam and go back out again. And they would go and have ice cream cones at the store right next to there, and I would always have orange ice and chocolate cone, and my sister did the same. So that's one of our fondest memories.
Do you recall either parent or both teaching you something that stuck with you? A moral code, a lesson, a to-do, a not-to-do, that made an impression upon you that you carried with you through life?
I would think that my entire youth was in that category. I mean, I pointed out the very devoted mother and a father who was very proud of me. And I was precocious, and they enjoyed that fact. I was taught to read very early. I was recorded, so there are recordings of me singing as a child.
Who you are to me, my godfather, how you, godfather, are to me, your godson, is the patriarch who brings us all together in Maryland for holidays, that we would go. I always felt that we would go visit you. You were like the beacon that brought the family together. Did you take that from your father, your parents, or the idea of family and the large clan of us all? I feel like you always brought us together.
Well, you know, that's interesting you should say that. I inherited that environmentally from my parents. My father was a wonderful host. He surrounded us with very interesting people who weren't family. Newbold, Caleb Taylor, Newbold Dunn.
Remember Newbold?
The Benville family, and mostly Marie and Peter. Uncle Floody, who was a dentist, Famigini. And Al Bongiovanni, who was a genius of a great pediatrician, and his friend, Walter Eberlein. And they would have wonderful dinner parties. And Mother, of course, was an excellent cook. And in fact, they said to her, you know, Dorothy, you should open a restaurant, cook for people that cook so well. And she said, I only cook for people I love. And so we had wonderful parties. New Year's Eve, we would do a bridge party, and we'll drink champagne at midnight and listen to Lawrence Welk on the television, I guess, at that point. And I remember that they used to give a prize to the person who had the most points in playing the duplicate bridge. And I always won, which is very embarrassing, so I stopped taking it after a while. And my father was originally taught me to play Culbertson, who was the inventor of contract bridge. And then everybody else counted points rather than counting honor tricks. And then the Italian bridge team, the blue team, started winning all the championships. So he insisted that he and I would learn the Italian blue team system, which we played very effectively. And then it was outlawed in America. People weren't allowed to play the Italian system because it was too complicated for everybody else to learn, and I didn't want everybody doing it. So I have that recollection.
Something I remember about grandmother, or how I would present her to my children, is someone who always tried to make me better. Always. Every time I saw her, she had advice. Did she teach you like that? Did she make an effort to make you better? Or?
Well, I remember distinctly that when we were eating, and I would cut steak with a knife and fork and try to eat the steak with my left hand, she would stick me with her fork. And so, of course, like every other American, would change hands after I cut the steak, until I got to NATO headquarters. And I had an Italian colonel assigned to me, and we went to lunch together in Brussels, and where I'm eating, and he said, why do Americans insist on eating with one hand? And since that day, I've eaten with two hands. And I can eat a chicken now without having to pick it up because I can use a knife and fork to negotiate, which I couldn't do before. So my mother tried to impress that on me, which was a part of our culture I've discarded.
What about you?
Well, the most important thing in life is love. You don't have love, you're really in trouble. Of course, you don't know that till later on. But your parents need to be loving children from the very beginning, continuously and completely. They do that for you, you do that for yours, and that's extremely important. And I was very fortunate to have two very loving parents, caring parents, who would discipline me to make sure that I was doing the right thing, and who were immersed in the Italian-American culture, and I learned to do all the things that Italian-Americans do. The one thing they didn't do is they didn't speak Italian to me, which they could have done. My father was raised speaking Italian, so his thought centers were Italian, but he spoke perfect English as well. My mother spoke a little Italian. She would have been too young to have absorbed the Italian that the older ones would have had. And so I had to learn Italian on my own, and I've done reasonably well, but not as well as if I had it spoken to me as a child. So I would say the most important thing is to love your children and to make sure they get educated. And then you have to give them a good sense of morals. They have to understand that you have to love your fellow man as you love yourself. And you can do that, and that's very important. And once Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you wouldn't know good unless you know evil. But once you know evil, it's hard to resist. And so the very meaning of life is to use your intelligence, your creative thinking, your sense of responsibility to make choices between good and evil. And you won't always pick good, but you always have to repent the evil and make it better. That's what I would advise. Well, I want to say more about my father.
I was just going to add. I was just thinking of a way to phrase it.
He was a very interesting man. He was a firstborn, which is a big thing in the Italian family. In his case, he had a sister born before him who died young, and of course that's a tremendous blow on parents. And they really doted on him. And he had two sisters after he was born, and then he had 4 brothers after that. And they all looked up to him like he was their hero. And he really took over my grandfather's business, and he carried his siblings in the business. And I was someone who was accomplished, and he was challenged by my accomplishments. And he would always expect more of me than was possible. And I was not affected by that. I did what I thought was the right thing, which, I remember having an argument, or not an argument, going in to see the dean of the college, University of Pennsylvania, and explaining what was wrong with his college and how the teachers were acting dictatorially, and they weren't listening, and they weren't teaching. They just wanted you to give them the answers they wanted to hear on tests, and they used the power of the grade in order to rule over you. And I thought that was not a way to do education. And he kind of agreed with me, but didn't do anything about it, of course. My father, as I said, sang, and he asked me to play the piano for him so he could sing, and he would offer me money to do that. And when I was a child, I was always fat. And when I was 13 years old, he offered me $1 a pound to lose weight. And I lost, I think, 10 pounds and made $10, and of course gained it all back in a very short period of time. We had a funny relationship. His brothers were like sons to him, and I was like a brother to him. And I really lament the fact that when he died at 63, and I was 72, I was 28, 38. And I wish I'd had around longer, as long as my mother. So, in my maturity, we could have had different discussions, and wouldn't have been a father and a son. It would have been 2 adults. So.
Before it was more tense, and as you got older, it would have been more relaxed?
No, I would have been more mature, so that the nature of the discussions would have been more on equal footing than a father talking to a son and a son to a father. Okay?
That's great. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure, sir.